Hola, mi gente. Welcome to Unfiltered and Unapologetic, the space where we heal in truth, in faith, and with tenderness without leaving our culture behind. And today, I want to talk about something many of us were never taught. Not how to make money, not how to build a career, not how to take care of our bodies, but how to understand our emotions. Because many of us learned how to be responsible, we learned how to be emotionally aware. We learned how to show up, how to work hard, how to take care of other people, how to carry a lot, but many of us were never taught how to understand what we are feeling. And before we go any further, I want to say something important. This isn't about blaming our parents. This isn't about blaming our grandparents. This isn't about blaming the people who raised us. Because the truth is, many of them were doing the best they could with what they knew. Many of them never learned emotional awareness either. Many of them were raised by people who never talked about feelings. Many of them were carrying responsibilities, pressures, fears, and wounds that they never had the opportunity to process themselves. You can't teach a language you were never taught. And for many of our families, emotional awareness wasn't a language they learned to speak. That doesn't make them bad people. It makes them human. But it also means that many of us grew up without the tools to understand what was happening inside of us. We weren't taught how to sit with sadness. We weren't taught what healthy anger looked like. We weren't taught how to recognize anxiety. We weren't taught that jealousy can reveal a desire. We weren't taught that grief can exist even when no one has died. We weren't taught that emotions carry information. So instead, many of us learned to judge our feelings, to suppress them, to distract ourselves from them, to convince ourselves that if we ignored them long enough, they would eventually go away. Many of us became emotionally fluent in everyone else's needs while remaining strangers to our own feelings. And maybe that's why so many people feel disconnected from themselves. Not because they're weak, but because nobody ever taught them how to listen. The truth is that emotions don't appear simply because we ignore them. They show up somewhere. They show up in our relationships. They show up in our habits. They show up in our self-talk. They show up in our bodies. They show up in the opportunities we talk ourselves out of, in the boundaries we struggle to set. They also show up in the love we accept because we don't believe we deserve more. And I think one of the biggest misunderstandings about healing is that people assume healing means feeling less. Less sadness, less fear, less anger, less grief. But what if I told you that healing isn't about feeling less? What if it's about listening better? What if your emotions are not the problem? What if they're trying to help you? What if that anxiety you've been fighting is trying to tell you something? What if that sadness you've been carrying has something to say? What if that jealousy you've been judging is pointing toward a dream you've been afraid to claim? What if your emotions are not interruptions? What if they're messengers? Because every emotion carries information. Every emotion carries a need, a story, and every emotion is trying to reveal something your conscious mind may not fully understand yet. So today, we're going to talk about what your feelings know, what your mind doesn't. Because maybe you don't need to fight your feelings. Maybe you need to listen to them. One of the biggest misconceptions about emotions is that they're problems, that they're interruptions, that there's something to get rid of as quickly as possible. Most of us were never taught what emotions actually are. We were taught how to react to emotions, how to judge them, how to hide them. But very few of us were taught what emotions are designed to do. Emotions are information. They're signals, communication. Think about physical pain. If you touch a hot stove, pain wasn't the problem. Pain is the message. The pain is telling you that something needs your attention. Emotions work in a similar way. The feeling itself isn't necessarily the problem. It's often trying to communicate something important. But many of us spend more time trying to get rid of emotions than understanding them. We ask, how do I stop feeling this? Instead of asking, what is this feeling trying to tell me? Anger might be trying to tell you that a boundary has been crossed. Anxiety might be telling you that something feels uncertain. Sadness might be telling you to acknowledge a loss. Jealousy might be revealing a desire you've been afraid to admit. Now, that doesn't mean every emotion is automatically right. Feelings are messengers. They are not always instructions. You don't have to act on every emotion. You simply just need to understand it. The goal isn't to let emotions control us. The goal is to learn from them. And I think a lot of people are afraid that if they start feeling their emotions, they'll get stuck there. Maybe you've thought that before. If I let myself cry, I won't stop. If I let myself feel this anger, it'll consume me. If I admit how hurt I am, I don't know what I'll find. But emotions are like waves. They move, they rise, and they peak. And eventually, they pass. What often keeps emotions stuck isn't feeling them. It's resisting them. Pretending they aren't there. Carrying them for years without acknowledging them. The truth is that emotional awareness isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's learning to pause long enough to ask, what is this feeling trying to show me? Because every emotion carries information. And the sooner we stop treating emotions like enemies, the sooner we start learning from them. I have the first journal prompt here for you guys. Think about an emotion you've been feeling a lot lately. What happens when you stop asking, how do I get rid of this? And start asking, what might this feeling be trying to tell me? And the affirmation for this question is, my emotions are not enemies. They are messages guiding me toward a deeper understanding and self-awareness. So let's start with an emotion that gets a bad reputation. Anger. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with anger, myself included sometimes. Some people fear it, some people avoid it, some people judge themselves for feeling it. But anger itself is not bad. Anger is information. And more often than not, anger is trying to protect something. Your dignity, your values, your boundaries, your needs, your self-respect. The problem is that many of us were taught to focus on the expression of anger instead of the message underneath it. We were taught that anger was the problem. But sometimes anger is simply revealing a problem that already existed. Think about the times you felt deeply frustrated with someone. A friend, a partner, family member, a coworker. Often, the anger didn't begin in that moment. It had been building. Because resentment rarely happens overnight. Resentment is often the result of needs that have gone unspoken for so long. It's the result of saying yes when you wanted to say no. Giving when you're already exhausted. Putting yourself last and hoping someone notices. And I think a lot of us, especially in Latino families, were taught that being a good person meant being available all the time. Helping everyone, showing up for everyone, making sacrifices for everyone. Maybe you've agreed to go to every family gathering even when you're exhausted. Maybe you've loaned money you couldn't really afford to loan because you felt guilty saying no. Maybe you've become the person everyone calls when they need something. And one day you realize you're frustrated with everyone around you. But the deeper question is, have I been honoring my own needs? Because while generosity is beautiful, self-abandonment is not. There is a difference. Sometimes the anger you're feeling isn't because you're a bad person. Sometimes it's because a part of you is tired. Tired of overextending, of carrying responsibilities that were never yours, of pretending you're okay with things you're actually not okay with. Here's something that I've had to learn myself. Anger is often a boundary arriving late. Because when we ignore our needs long enough, our emotions eventually get louder. Not because they're trying to punish us, because they're trying to get our attention. Instead of asking, why am I so angry? Try asking, what boundary have I not honored? What need have I been neglecting? What truth have I been avoiding? The goal isn't to become someone who never feels angry. The goal is to become someone who can listen to anger without being controlled by it. Because healthy anger isn't destruction. Healthy anger is clarity. I have another prompt here for you guys. Think about a situation where you've been feeling frustrated, irritated, or resentful. What boundary, need, or truth might that anger be trying to bring to your attention? And the affirmation for this question is, I honor my emotions without being controlled by them. My anger helps me recognize what deserves my attention, respect, and care. Now let's talk about an emotion that so many know intimately. Anxiety. Anxiety is often misunderstood. Many people assume anxiety means something is wrong with them, but anxiety is often the mind and body trying to prepare for uncertainty, trying to predict, to prevent pain before it happens. The challenge is that life is uncertain by nature. There will always be things we cannot predict, things we cannot control. And for many of us, uncertainty feels uncomfortable because certainty feels safer. We want answers, we want guarantees, we want proof before we can take the next step. But life rarely ever works that way. And honestly, this is something I've had to learn myself. I've had seasons where I wanted certainty before making a decision. I wanted to know exactly how things were going to work out. I wanted guarantees and proof that everything would be okay before I took the next step. And if I'm being honest, life rarely ever gives us that. There have been moments where I felt frustrated because I didn't have all the answers yet, where I wanted clarity immediately and wanted the next chapter to reveal itself before the current one was even finished. But I've learned that certainty and trust are not the same thing. Certainty says, show me the entire path first. Trust says, I may not see the whole path, but I can take the next step. And I think that's where faith comes in. Not necessarily faith that everything will go exactly the way we want, but faith that we can handle whatever comes next. Faith that God can guide us even when we don't have all the details. That uncertainty doesn't automatically mean something is wrong. Sometimes it simply means we're in the middle of becoming. Sometimes anxiety is asking us an important question. Do you trust yourself enough to handle what comes next? Because often what we're afraid of isn't the situation itself. We're afraid of disappointment, rejection, failure, loss, and so we try to control everything. We overthink, replay conversations, we imagine worst case scenarios, not because we're irrational, but because we're trying to feel safe. But control and safety are not the same thing. Sometimes the more we try to control life, the more anxious we become, because control has limits. There will always be things outside of our hands. Sometimes anxiety isn't asking us to control more. Sometimes it's asking us to trust more. Trusting ourselves, our resilience, and trusting God. I have another prompt here for you guys. What situation am I trying to control right now? What would change if I focused on trusting myself instead of predicting every possible outcome? And the affirmation for this question is, I do not need all the answers to take that next step. I trust myself and I trust that I will navigate whatever comes next. Sadness might be one of the most misunderstood emotions of all because we live in a culture that constantly tells us to move on, to stay positive, and to focus on the bright side. And while optimism has its place, sadness has wisdom too. Sadness often appears when something matters, when something meaningful has changed, when something important has been lost. And not all grief comes from death. Sometimes we grieve relationships, friendships, dreams, opportunities, versions of ourselves. Sometimes we grieve the life we thought we would have, the relationship we thought could last, the career we thought would work out, the support we wish we had received, the version of ourselves we thought we'd be by now. And because these losses are often invisible, people don't always recognize the grief, but the heart does. The body does. The emotions do. Sadness slows us down for a reason. It asks us to acknowledge what mattered. It asks us to honor what was, and to stop pretending that every ending is easy. Feeling sad doesn't mean you're moving backward. It doesn't mean you're ungrateful. Sometimes it simply means you're human. Sometimes it means you've loved deeply. Sometimes it means you're letting go. And sometimes becoming someone new requires grieving who you used to be. That's growth. I have another prompt here for you guys. What am I grieving that I haven't fully acknowledged? What loss, change, or transition deserves more compassion from me? And the affirmation for this question is, I honor what has been lost while remaining open to what is still possible. My sadness deserves compassion, not judgment. Now, let's talk about an emotion that almost nobody wants to admit they feel. Jealousy. The moment jealousy shows up, many people immediately judge themselves. They feel guilty, ashamed, embarrassed. But what if jealousy isn't always something to be ashamed of? What if it's information? Think about it. Most of the time, jealousy appears when we see someone experiencing something we desire. A relationship, a career, a level of confidence, a lifestyle, a creative opportunity, a sense of freedom. And instead of asking why the emotion is there, we immediately criticize ourselves for having it. But what if jealousy is simply revealing a dream that hasn't been fully acknowledged yet? What if it's showing us a desire that's asking for our attention? Now, there is a difference between jealousy and resentment. Jealousy says, I wish I had that too. Resentment says, if I can't have it, neither should they. One creates awareness and the other creates bitterness. Healthy jealousy can become inspiration because it helps us identify what we value, what we want, and what we're ready to pursue. Sometimes the people who trigger us are revealing possibilities we've been afraid to claim for ourselves. Not because we're lacking, not because they're better, but because they're holding up a mirror. And that mirror can be uncomfortable because it forces us to ask, what do I really want? What dream have I been talking myself out of? What desire have I convinced myself is unrealistic? The emotion itself isn't the problem. The question is what we choose to do with the information. Because jealousy can either become comparison or it can become clarity. I have another prompt here for you guys. Think about someone you've recently felt jealous of. What desire, goal, or possibility might that feeling be revealing about your own life? And the affirmation for this question is, I allow other people's success to inspire me rather than diminish me. Their path does not take away from my own. Now, let's take this conversation a little deeper, because I don't believe emotions block blessings, but I do believe ignored emotions create behaviors that can block opportunities, relationships, peace, and growth. Think about it. If someone carries unhealed rejection, they may push people away before they can get hurt. If someone carries unaddressed fear, they may never take the opportunity they've been praying for. If someone believes deep down that they aren't worthy, they may sabotage the very thing they say they want. This is why emotional awareness matters. Not because we're trying to become emotionally perfect, but because what remains unconscious often influences our choices. The emotion isn't the problem. Avoiding it is. Because what we refuse to acknowledge often finds another way to get our attention. It shows up in relationships, in our habits, in our self-talk, the opportunities we avoid, the patterns we keep repeating. That's why emotional awareness is powerful. It's not about living in your feelings. It's about understanding them well enough that they stop running your life from behind the scenes. And this is where some of the teachings from Florence Scovel Shinn, Neville Goddard, and Abraham Hicks connect with what we're talking about today. I've read their books, I've listened to them preach, and while they teach things a little differently, one idea shows up again and again. Awareness comes before change. You can't shift a belief you refuse to look at. You can't heal a wound you pretend isn't there. And you can't create a different future while ignoring the emotions that are trying to tell you something about your present. Neville Goddard often talked about the importance of the state we're living from. And I think emotions can help us understand what state we're in. Not because we need to force ourselves to be positive all the time, but because our emotions can reveal beliefs we haven't fully looked at yet. If I constantly feel unworthy, rejected, afraid, or disconnected, that doesn't mean I failed. That may mean there's a story underneath that feeling asking for my attention. Because sometimes that emotion is not the root. The emotion is pointing to a belief. And Abraham Hicks often describes emotions as guidance, not punishment. Not proof that something is wrong with you. Guidance. A way of helping you recognize whether you're moving closer to or further away from alignment with the person you're becoming. Whether you agree with every part of those teachings or not, I think there's wisdom in asking, what if my emotions aren't there to hurt me? What if they're here to guide me? What if they're helping me identify the beliefs, fears, and wounds and patterns that are asking for my attention? Because the more awareness we have, the more choices we have. And the more choices we have, the more power we have to create something different. I have another prompt here for you guys. What emotion have I been avoiding that may be influencing my choices, relationships, or opportunities? And the affirmation for this question is, I release emotional patterns that no longer align with the life I am creating. So, what happens when we stop fighting our feelings? What happens when we stop treating emotions like enemies? We begin to trust ourselves, understand ourselves, respond instead of react, recognize our needs before resentment builds, notice our fears before they make decisions for us, grieve what needs to be grieved, pursue what truly matters to us, and perhaps, most importantly, we begin to build a relationship with ourselves. because self-trust doesn't come from never feeling difficult emotions. Self-trust comes from knowing that when those emotions show up, you're willing to listen, you're willing to learn, and willing to stay present. Healing isn't learning how to feel less. It's learning how to listen better. And the more we listen, the less we need our emotions to scream to get our attention. And before we end today's episode, I want you to think about something. Which emotion showed up for you while you were listening? Was it anger, anxiety, sadness, jealousy? What if that emotion isn't something you need to fix today? What if your only job today is to listen? I have the last journal prompt here for you guys. What message might my emotions be trying to share with me today? What would change if I approached my feelings with curiosity instead of judgment? And the affirmation for this question is, I trust myself enough to listen, feel, learn, and move forward with wisdom. If there's one thing I hope you take away from today's episode, it's this. Your emotions are messengers. Anger may be revealing a boundary. Anxiety may be asking for trust. Sadness may be asking you to honor a loss. Jealousy may be pointing toward a desire. And the more willing we are to listen, the more we understand ourselves. Because healing isn't about becoming emotionless. It's about becoming emotionally aware. It's about learning the language many of us were never taught. And maybe that's part of the healing. Learning a new language. The language of your own inner world. And now we're going to end with a prayer per usual. Put your hand on your chest and take a deep breath. Dear God, thank you for creating us with the ability to feel. Thank you for the emotions that help us understand ourselves more deeply. Help us stop judging ourselves for being human. To stop believing that every difficult feeling is something to fear. Give us the wisdom to understand what our emotions are trying to teach us. Help us recognize the boundaries we need to set, the grief we need to honor, and the fears we need to face, and the desires we need to stop talking ourselves out of. Teach us how to listen to ourselves with compassion, how to trust ourselves more deeply, how to trust you even when life feels uncertain. Help us release old patterns, old stories, and old beliefs that no longer serve us. And remind us that healing is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming more honest, more aware, more present, and more connected. Help us remember that our emotions are not our enemies. They are part of the guidance you've placed within us. And help us have the courage to listen. Amen. Thank you guys so much for spending this time with me today. If this episode resonated with you, share it with a friend, a sibling, a parent, or someone who may need this reminder. And if you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to leave a rating and review. It helps more people find these conversations and helps this community continue to grow. You can listen to Unfiltered and Unapologetic with Caitlin on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you're looking for additional tools to support your healing journey, check out my guided journals, affirmation workbooks, and free resources linked in the show notes. You can also connect with me on Instagram at Unfil and Unapologetic Pod. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. Your feelings are not your enemy, and maybe they're trying to tell you something. Maybe this week, instead of fighting them, you can listen. I'll see you in the next episode.